Hi, my name is Vesa Juvonen and I work as a principal consultant in Microsoft Corporation. In this module, we'll cover the key improvements in feature framework and in solution deployment. We'll first cover the new key changes and improvements generally in the feature framework, and on the second section, we'll do the same for the solution packages. There's a lot of new possibilities for both of these, which will increase the productivity of the developers and make the development of customizations more straightforward and easier. So in this section, we'll cover the key updates and enhancements for the feature framework. As most of you likely know, feature framework is used to deploy modular customizations to the SharePoint environment. Features in this context mean XML files which are declaring changes or updates to the functionalities available on the SharePoint. We use feature framework, for example, to deploy new content to the SharePoint or change the site provisioning logic and so on. In here, we'll see some of the key new changes which we will go through more detailed in upcoming slides. Feature framework supports now feature versioning, which can be used to modify also the previously deployed sites, meaning that if you have some changes in your feature which should be synced also to already existing sites on your production environment, you can push these changes to existing sites more easily than within the previous SharePoint versions. Since we have now the versioning of the features, we also need to be aware of this in feature dependencies. We have also new events where we can hook up some custom code. Events basically classically, for example, used to verify that end users' input in a SharePoint list follows up to objectives. We can, for example, check that for the time submissions, end time is later than start time. In SharePoint 2010, we have new places to add these events. In 2007, we could use feature framework to deploy our workflow templates, but there was no support to define workflow associations using XML. This is now supported as well in SharePoint 2010. Property pack values are, for example, used to parameterize your customizations. Property pack feature elements support deploying these property values to property packs of numerous SharePoint objects. One of the really interesting new functionalities is also the web templates, which enables us a way to deploy new site provisioning instructions as a service. And we'll also cover new options for the custom action usage, which is used, for example, to deploy links and ribbon buttons and so on to your sites. As mentioned in the previous slide, we now support versioning of the features. This means that as part of the changes developed to the existing features, we can define also which kind of changes are applied to the existing sites, where previous versions of the feature has already been activated. We have multiple options to define these actions using XML, and we can also write our own custom upgrade actions, which will execute code defined in a feature receiver. Feature receiver base class has now support for feature upgrading method, which will be called in case custom upgrade action has been defined to feature XML. Version range denotes the target version of the upgrade. Any feature with this version or newer, or where the version does not exist, will be upgraded to end version. The feature version of the upgraded feature will be updated to reflect the new end version statement. We have multiple different ways to define these feature actions in XML, and there are different kind of things we can do. Let's go these one by one. So we have the apply element manifest. This allows for additional manifest files as part of the feature upgrade. We have the add a content type field functionality which can be used to add a new field to a provisioned content type. The element takes a content type ID, field ID, and a push-down option, which denotes if the system should propagate the changes to child lists and content types. We also have the map file functionality, which can be used to map a file URL to a separate file. This means that if end user has, for example, customized existing ASPX file, and you would like to update that particular file by replacing the content using alternative ASPX file, you can map the file URLs using this particular element. And as a final option, we have the custom upgrade action, which allows for passing one or more parameters to the feature receiver's feature upgrading method. And then we can write the actual upgrade code based on our business requirements. In the example XML file in the slide, we have defined upgrade actions to be performed when feature is upgraded from version 1.0 to version 2.0. We have a one new element file which will be executed and a one custom upgrade action so that the feature receiver of the specific feature will be called and we can execute any code required. Since we now have the versioning support for features, we also support defining the minimum dependent feature version for our feature activation dependencies. This means that you can define the minimum version of the dependent feature which has to be present before the particular feature can be activated. In Visual Studio 2010, we have a support to define feature activation dependencies in a feature framework designer, but there's no support for this minimal version option in the designer itself. This means that if you want to define the minimal version dependency, you can't do it using the designer. Rather, create the dependency manually into the feature XML template of the particular feature. If the minimum version has been defined, we will try to upgrade the dependent feature if it's upgradable and does not meet the minimum version requirement. Even if we detect that the upgrade would not get our version to what we would need, we would still upgrade it. The idea is that at least the feature version is closer to objective. Other than the minimal version attribute, the dependency rules are the same as in 2007. Dependencies only work if they have been defined in a feature which has the same scope or is one level higher. For example, a web as in site scope feature has a dependency site collection feature. Hidden features cannot have dependencies. And if the dependent feature is hidden, it will be automatically activated. Events provide us a way to associate our custom code to some functionality happening in the SharePoint. Events are a really powerful way to customize the out-of-the-box user experience to bring additional business logic for the functionalities we are providing. On the site level, we have two new events, which are used when sites are created. These are the synchronous web adding and the asynchronous web provisioned events. On the list level, we have new events related to the list lifecycle. These are the synchronous list adding and list deleting events and the asynchronous list added and list deleted events. Event names are quite self-evident of the purpose where to use them. We also have new events related to the lifecycle of the workflow, which can be used to further customize the workflow behavior. This gives more flexibility for handling and providing workflows for business processes. Web provisioning events were the new web adding web provisioned events. The web adding event is available asynchronously when the site provisioning has been started. We can, for example, cancel the provisioning process using this. The web provisioned event is available when the site has been completely provisioned, as in created to the SharePoint, basically meaning also the fact that all associated features and stapled features have been activated. Note though that these events are only available when we create subsites for site collection. This means that events won't be fired when we create new site collections or actually create the root side of the site collection. When we are registering our event receivers, we are using receivers element available within the feature framework. There are now new options available for registration purposes. We are able to define receivers to be activated only in a root web of the site collection. We can define the scope of the receiver, and the scope can be defined either to be a site or a web, meaning the site collection or a site within the site collection. We can also define the receiver only to be associated with a single list using the list URL. Some of the custom actions take advantage of the same flexibility as well. In the example which we have on the slide, we are defining item adding event, which is used only in a single custom list located in the root web of the site collection. This flexibility of registering our events was not available in the previous versions of the SharePoint. We can also define now workflow associations using XML-based approach. In previous SharePoint versions, we only could deploy our workflow templates using a feature framework, but the actual association of the workflow to a list required some code to be executed. Traditionally, this was done using a feature receiver. Now in SharePoint 2010, we can associate our workflow templates to a list directly using a feature framework elements, and no custom code is required for this. There's no designers for this option in Visual Studio, but you can define the element, you can create the element, required element structure to an empty SharePoint project item. In the example XML, we are associating a workflow template to a shared document library. The other picture on the slides is from the Visual Studio 2010. This wizard is shown when we start creating workflow code in a Visual Studio, and it asks some additional information concerning the associated lists, which are used for debugging purposes. This wizard does not, however, create the workflow association element for your project. It's only there for debugging purposes. An element manifest can contain a new element section called property bag. This element allows key value pairs to be promoted into their parent objects, such as web, subweb, folder, list item, or a file. This allows the developer to avoid writing custom code which promotes feature properties into a property bag of these objects. Each value is added or updated within the hash table object, which implements the property bag of the parent. Currently, two types, date time and int32, are enforced, which basically means that if current value to be assigned to a property bag is either of these types, new value has to be the same type value, or update of the feature is not successful and will store null as the property bag. Note that we are unable to use property bag element to promote properties to feature, web application, or list object. This means that this also means that this will not work for farm or web application feature. Only supported scope is web. One of the really good, cool features for upgrade is the fact that SharePoint 2010 supports legacy user experience. For a lot of the objects and elements in SharePoint 2010, we have UI version attribute or property, which can be used the requested UI version. For the custom actions which are used to define, for example, links to numerous places in a UI, we can define dependent UI version. This means that we can define links which are either shown when we use 2007 or 2010 user experience. In the example XML, we are defining 3 new links to site setting page of the site. Each of the custom action elements has a UI version attribute defined. One of the 3 custom actions are visible in both of these UI modes, other dependent on the version. Number 3 means legacy SharePoint 2007 user experience, and number 4 means the new SharePoint 2010 user experience. As a result of the XML element, in the site where we use the new SharePoint 2010 user experience, you'll see 2 new links under the users and permissions groups. One of the new supported sub-elements sections for custom actions is support to define ribbon customizations. Ribbon is present throughout the SharePoint user interface, and for each page type for a list we have a dedicated identifiers which can be used to define where the button will be visible or available. In this example, we define a new second hello button to be visible on location ribbon.wikipage and so on. The location attribute defines the page and ribbon location where the button or ribbon control is placed. Notice also how we create the UI handler for the handler in the XML, which will handle the click events for newly available button. You can also use custom action elements to associate custom JavaScript files to your pages. There are new script source and script block attributes available for custom action definition. In this example of the slide, we are adding automatically JavaScript file to pages on a particular site using the script source as attribute. Obviously, we need to also deploy our example.js file to reference location, which in this case is the folder named as the Visual Studio project, located under Layouts folder in the 14 root folder. After the JavaScript file has been deployed and the custom action is present or activated, we can execute any JavaScript commands necessary within our site. This functionality provides more flexibility to customize the user experience without requirements to change, for example, master pages which we use. It's a convenient way to customize, for example, for your user experience of the out-of-the-box sites with only XML lines, and obviously with the JavaScript you are defining. To customize list instances provisioned to the site, we can also use the new custom schema attribute to change the provisioning instructions for a particular list instance. Schema XML file contains the definition of the list template to be used. Normally, provisioning is based on a default schema XML file associated to particular list type. In this case, the list type is 100, which means generic list. In SharePoint 2010, we can, however, define the alternative custom schema to be used for the particular instance. This way, we don't need to create new list templates, rather tell the SharePoint to provision the specific generic list instance using alternative template. Since we don't have to define alternative provisioning logic as alternative list template, we increase the productivity of the developers, and we don't have to end up having numerous additional templates which are only used once in a site. And this definitely decreases the overall complexity of the custom structures. Note that when you are creating your alternative schema XML, it has to contain all elements used for list instance creation. We don't use any of the definition located in a default schema XML, only information on the alternate custom schema definition. This means that you'll need to have the content types, fields, views, forms, and so on defined within your alternate schema. So basically, custom schema is a fully fledged list schema which is as self-sufficient as it is. One of the really cool new functionalities in SharePoint 2010 is the new web template element in a feature framework. The web template element is used, for example, in out-of-the-box to replace old site template format. In previous versions where we saved a site as a template was an STP file which had direct dependencies on a site definition, and the file declared the differences compared to it. In 2010, when we save a site template, site structure is saved as a solution package, and inside of that package we utilize the web template structure to define the details of the template. Element manifest with the web template is accompanied with a separate ONET.xml file, which defines all structures to be created during site provisioning. Similar way as the custom schema for the list instance is a self-sufficient, the ONET.xml for the web template is a self-sufficient, fully fledged ONET.xml file defining all the required elements for the site to be created. The key advantage of the web template element is the possibility to deploy new site creation instructions using feature framework. This way we don't have to develop and deploy separate site definitions which would be placed to a separate location in the file system. Since web template defines the site structure from a feature, it's also supported for the sandbox solution deployment option, which provides even more flexibility in our deployment architecture. Web template feature can be either scoped for a site collection or a farm level, which means that we can deploy our custom site provisioning instructions also as a full trust solution, and the site template would be available throughout the SharePoint farm. In the example, we define the alternative web template, which is based on an empty site definition. We can see this from the base template name and from the base configuration attributes. This also means that this information is set as the template information for the SP web object, created based on a web template. So even though we are using alternative provisioning instructions, we are binding the site only to out-of-the-box definition. This enables us a way to alternate the ONET.xml file accompanied by the web template, also after some of the sites have been created. We can even retract our solution package from the farm, and the sites would still work as they are. Alternate ONET.xml file is only used during provisioning time, so there's no dependencies on it after the site has been created. Let's have a closer look on the web template element and how we can actually use that to define our custom provisioning instructions for the SharePoint. We'll also cover how to provision a new site programmatically using web template elements, which we have deployed as using features. There are a few tricks to identify when we use these web templates, so let's go through this.
So, let's have a look on how the web template functionality actually works. I have here a Visual Studio solution created before, where we have one SharePoint project type and one console application, which we will use to create our site collection automatically. But let's first do this manually and have a look on the web template functionality a little bit closer. So the web template is something which we can define within the elements.xml file, and in this case we have created a web template called my web template, which is based on STS0. STS0 is a theme site, so we will associate the site which will be created based on this web template to theme site definition, even though during provisioning time of the web template we are using alternative instructions. We can also see that the title is My Web Template and the display category is Cool Sites. The display category refers to tab which is available when we are creating sites. Next to the web template XML, which is an element.xml file, we have the ONET.xml file, which actually defines which kind of instructions or structures will be created when the site is created based on the web template. This is a standard .NET file and it supports similar functionalities as any site definition. But now the key thing is that we are deploying the site definition or the site creation instructions as a feature. And we are associating our newly created site to existing site definition based on settings within the web template. This web template has been, or SharePoint project item has been associated to my web template feature, which has been scoped to be as a site, which basically means that whenever this feature is activated in a site collection level, a new template will be available from the create site functionality. We can also set the scope to be farm, which would basically mean that the template would be available throughout the farm. And since farm scoped features are activated automatically or by default, that would mean that whenever the solution package has been deployed, there will be a new web template instructions available throughout the farm. In this case, let's keep the scope as a site, since we're going to deploy our instructions as a sandbox solution. The following thing is to compile our solution, so we get the actual WSP package, and the package has been succeeded. To get the solution package to the Visual Studio or to be deployed, we need to create a template or an empty site collection. So let's move to central administration. And within the central administration, you can see also that this central admin application has been designed or changed dramatically based on from the 2007. When we start creating new site collections, we can do that from the application management and create a site collection. The following step is to define which URL the actual new site collection will be created. Let's name the site collection as a template and web template demonstration, and let's define the URL for our newly created site. It will be http internetcontoso.com/sites/template. The following thing is also something new in 2010. We can create a site collection and define that the template will be defined later. So we are actually able to create an empty site collection, which would be, for example, something which the IT organization can create, and then the new site collection owner can actually upload the template to be used, if we are using the sandbox solution option. So let's create the site collection to our web application. And that didn't take that long, and let's move to sites/templates so we can actually see what kind of functionality is available. Since we didn't select the template to be used, our first thing we need to do when we go to the site collection is to select the template to use as a provisioning instructions for the site collection. We can obviously use all of the out-of-the-box site definitions if we want, but there's also a new option available, which is the solution gallery. So we are able to upload our WSP package to this particular site collection, and we are able to provision our structures based on the web template which I just showed. So let's browse to the correct place and select the web template WSP package to be uploaded. Let's activate that one by clicking the activate button from the ribbon, and after this we should have the cool templates available from the front page. So if we now move to the front page of the site collection, the same template functionality to select a template will be available, but we can also see the new cool site tab, and there's our custom My Web template, which we can now use as the instruction to create our sites. Let's select that one and click OK, and our newly created site collection will use this particular template as when it's creating different structures and functionalities within our site collection. The following thing is to select which kind of groups we are using. Let's use the default groups and click OK, and after that we can see our relatively simple web template creation. It looks like a theme site, but we have taken away some of the lists which are created by default. So this relatively well demonstrates the power of the web template. So now that we've seen how to deploy web template as a sandbox solution, let's have a look on the steps how we can actually take the same web template and deploy that to be available throughout the farm. So let's actually move back to the Visual Studio. And from the Visual Studio side, the only thing we need to do is change the scope of the feature. We might also, alternative option is to deploy our solution package as a full trust or a farm solution as it is, but in that case we would have to activate the feature in every single site collection to make the web template available. By setting the scope to farm, we don't have to explicitly activate the feature anymore, since the feature will be activated by default whenever the solution package is deployed. And this will bring our My Web template available throughout the farm in any site collection. So the scope has been updated to farm. Let's compile the code one more time, or package the code, since we need to deploy our solution package to the farm using centralized location. Let's clear up, and we need to deploy our solution package as a farm solution, which basically means that we need to use either STS-ADM or PowerShell to add the solution package to the solution store. When we run these commands, like the STS-ADM add solution, our WSP package will be uploaded to the configuration database, and after that we can actually deploy the solution package from the central administration. You've probably seen this functionality already in 2007 when you have been deploying your own customizations to your SharePoint farm. Now that the operation has been completed, we can move to central administration side, and from the system settings underneath the Manage Farm Solutions, we are able to see our My Web Template solution package. And as we can see, the status is not deployed, since we haven't deployed it yet. It's only in the configuration database in the solution store. Now if we click the solution package and start deploying it, we can see that this is a solution package which only contains XML files. And we can see that since the solution package is defined to be deployed globally. If the solution package would contain also assemblies which would have, for example, web controls or something else, or web parts, we would be able to define to which web applications the particular safe controls will be applied, which would basically mean that the web configuration file of that particular web application would be updated automatically. Let's deploy our solution, and after that we can actually use object model to create new site collections based on this structure. And the interesting thing about creating the new site collections based on our web template is the ID. So we are using quite similar code as we were using back in 2007 to create new site collection, and then we are using apply web template command to actually apply our web template to the particular site collection. But now the key thing here is the fact that by default the IDs of the web templates are something like STS1, STS0, which are the theme site and the empty site. But since we have deployed our web template, which is based on a feature, or our ONET.XML, which is based on a feature, the ID will have the feature GUID in it as well. So as we can see here, we have the same ID as the feature ID which is part of our solution package. And we're using that ID and the web template name to identify which template we are using when we create the root web of the particular site collection. Let's start executing the code. And we do have a breakpoint here waiting, just to show how we actually created the web template identifier. So first we are using the web application sites add to create a new site collection to the URL intranetcontoso.com/sites/ a parameter /identifier which we received as a parameter. And then when the site collection has been created, we need to provision the root web of the particular site collection. And now the web template name contains the feature ID and the actual title of the web template. And based on this information, SharePoint is able to identify the actual web template to use and use the proper ONIT XML to create the structures to that root web of the site collection. As you already saw from our code, we actually had associated or automatically started a browser. I'll show it to you from the code. Here we go. So we are starting a process.start and a new URL, which will basically start as a browser, which will show us the new site collection which we just created using our custom site template. So the web template functionality is as powerful as the site definition, but the key difference here is that when the site has been created, it has been associated to existing site definition. And it also means the fact that even though we would actually remove our site solution from our form, since the site collection or the site has been created based on our web template, but we have associated the site to existing site definition. After the solution packets have been removed and we have refreshed our form, the error is totally expected, since we are unable to access the form for a second when we actually deploy our solutions. Now we can actually see that the solution is not anymore deployed. We can even get rid of the solution totally. And despite the solution and our ONIT XML does not exist on the form, we are still able to request the site, and every functionality will work as it was. So the web template also gives this possibility to actually more easily update the existing site provisioning instructions. And therefore it's a brilliant way of providing site provisioning guidance or templates for SharePoint, and this way further customize the functionalities which are available. Since we did the IIS reset, or we recycled the form as part of the full trust solution deployment, the first request will take a while. Key point here to remember is that when we are deploying our solutions or web template as a sandbox solutions, there won't be these waiting times or service breaks available. So when we deploy our templates or solution as a sandbox solution, there won't be IIS recycles happening at the same time. And this is really powerful thing to bring new functionalities to the form without any service breaks. Now that the site is opening up from the URL intranetcontoso.com/sites/mywebtemplate, we will see that the site is fully functional and there's no issues on the rendering, as there would be if we would get rid of the site definitions, or if the site would have been created based on a site definition. So in here we can refresh the page and get the page in edit mode, and everything works as it should. And this is as said, due to the fact that the site has been associated to existing site definition, which is still there. despite the fact that during provisioning time we used alternative instructions. That ends up our demo.
Feature framework has been also improved in object model level. We have now new methods available to query what kind of features are available on a farm and in the list. There are few overloads for the query features method, which helps to identify, for example, only features which have a newer version available. Calling the query features method will return SP feature query result collection, which will contain information on the features matched to your query. Depending on a feature, returned feature could include features from a various scopes of the site. If we call the method in an SP web service level, it finds all the instances of the feature with a given ID that requires to be upgraded in a farm, if we are requesting the upgradable features. All scopes of features, farm, web application, site collections are supported. If we request the features in a web application level, it finds all features which are with the given ID in all content databases of the particular web application. If we request the features from a SP content database object, it returns those features to be updated within that particular content database. And obviously, if we use the same method from the SP site scope, it will give us those features which we can update or which are present within the site collection level. So in this section, we'll cover the key updates and enhancements for the solution deployment. With solution in this case, we refer to solution packages which are used to deploy customizations to SharePoint forms. Solution package can be considered as the installation package for SharePoint customizations. Package is actually a cap file which contains instructions for the SharePoint to how to extract the individual elements and what to do when the package has been deployed. In SharePoint 2010, we have now two types of solutions, which are the traditional full trust farm solutions and a sandbox solutions. Full trust solutions are packages which are deployed by administrator either using custom scripts or from central administration application. Sandbox solutions are solutions which can be deployed in site collection level as long as the end user has sufficient permissions for the particular site collection. In sandbox solution type, we actually are not deploying our customizations to the file system, they are only deployed to database. Already in 2007, we had possibility to create dependencies between features, and now in 2010, we can create dependencies also between the solution packages. We'll cover this topic more detailed in upcoming slides. There's also improved support for deploying customizations on a farm. One of the key improvements for the multilingual sites is the ability to deploy application resource files throughout our servers within the farm. We'll cover this one as well a little bit more detailed in upcoming slides. There's also improved support for solution upgrade. This means that we can more easily create deployment models for our customizations based on the project requirements for application lifecycle management process. Solution manifest defines the different elements within the solution package for SharePoint. It's used during the deployment of the solution to retract or to instruct SharePoint on where the files within the package are placed and how they should be installed. In 2010, we have a new support in the manifest, new supported functionalities in the manifest to perform additional tasks. As mentioned in the previous slide, we now support dependencies between the solution packages. We also have the improvements on the application resources files and in assembly deployment. For most of the definitions in Manifest, we have designers in Visual Studio 2010, but there are few options which we have to manually update to the XML if we want to use them. For the most of the time, Visual Studio is updating the Manifest XML file for us automatically, and especially for the smaller projects, there's often no requirements to manually update this file. Let's have a closer look on the deployment phases and details of the deployment in the following slides. As mentioned before, WSP file, as in solution package, is actually a cap file which contains the folder structures and files to be deployed to the SharePoint. When we deploy our solution as a full trust solution in a farm, we first add the solution to solution store, either using scripting or server-side object code. After the solution package has been deployed, it's stored within the configuration database of the farm. When we want to take our customizations in use, we deploy the custom solution package either using UI, command line, or object model, which will start the deployment process. Actual deployment of our customizations to the file system on each server in the farm is done by a specific timer job, which accesses the solution package and places the content of it to the file system. At the same time, we are also installing the required features which were defined in the solution manifest. One of the key advantages of the solution package is also the fact that if we are adding new servers to our SharePoint farm after initial deployment, already deployed solution packages are automatically deployed and taken into use also in this added server. So if solution packages especially if the solution packages are designed properly. This will ensure that all servers in the farm are in sync concerning the used customizations. This is also the reason why you should never update, for example, assemblies manually for any of the servers within the farm. We can also upgrade our full trust solutions from a command line or from object model, and obviously we can also retract and delete the solution packages from the farm. Note though that if there's any sites dependent on the customizations deployed within your solution package and you remove the solution package from a farm, these sites won't obviously work, or you run into errors. Sandbox solution is a new solution deployment method or option in a SharePoint 2010. It provides possibility to deploy your customizations in a site collection level using solution catalog functionality. All code deployed as a sandbox solution are executed in a separate process, which will ensure that even though the custom code has critical issues, it's unable to break up the whole rendering of the UI. If, for example, one web part has a bug and it's unable to perform its code, the only specific section from the user interface are not rendered properly. The other sections are available for the end users. Sandbox solution execution is also monitored, and administrators can configure the amount of resources available for these sandbox solutions. Code deployed as a sandbox solution has restrictions, so that the custom code cannot affect the farm performance or modify any configurations of the farm into kind of a higher level. This means that the code deployed as a sandbox solution can manipulate mainly only objects within the particular site collection where the solution has been deployed. Sandbox solution deployment option provides flexibility to take customizations in use in site collection level without necessarily involving IT organizations. This improves the flexibility of the platform again. We've mentioned the solution dependencies already a few times, and they are defined in the manifest XML. When solution is activated, and if the dependent solution is not, you will get a message stating that the solution cannot be activated due to this dependency. Quite often already in 2007, customizations were deployed using multiple solution packages, which had actually dependencies. You, for example, had some platforms specific or platform solution package which deployed platform code utilized by multiple web parts in other solution packages. In 2007, there was no way to check the existence of the dependent code as part of your deployment, and you had to always deploy the packages in proper order. In 2010, you can define these solution dependencies to ensure that the customizations are always deployed in a proper order. Note that even though the dependent solution would exist in a solution catalog or solution store, but have not been deployed, it won't be deployed automatically. Note also that there's no checks on dependencies when you are retracting solutions. So for retracting operations, you still need to ensure that you do the planned actions in a proper order. In 2010, you can also deploy your application resource file used in your application to proper app global resources folder located underneath the particular IIS application. There's actually two different options. If you deploy your resource files using the application resource file setting, resource files are placed under resources folder within the IIS. And if you use the app global resource file element, resource files are placed to app global resources folder. If you want to utilize the standard .NET 3.5 resource file code to provide, for example, multilingual support for your web parts, you'll need to place your resource file to app global resources folder for the particular web application. In Visual Studio 2010, when you add your resource files to your Visual Studio project, you can define deployment target by defining deployment type for the particular file using Properties window. When this is done, proper configurations will be automatically updated to the solution manifest based on your settings and actions performed within the Properties window. Let's have a closer look on how we can actually utilize these new functionalities introduced in previous slides.
So, in this demo we'll show the new functionalities which are available within the solution packaging and deployment functionality. In the Visual Studio, I have created two different Visual Studio SharePoint project types. These both have their own solution package and they will be deployed as a separate solutions to Solution Store. Now the key things which we want to show is the app global resources deployment and the solution dependencies. In my solution structure I have the primary solution which can be considered kind of a platform solution. It could act, for example, deploy some base classes, some base functionalities which are then utilized by other custom solutions. In this case our solution package is empty, but we have defined dependency on this one. But since this is the platform solution, the primary solution, we can see that there's only reference to a particular assembly, but there is no references to any other solutions. Every single solution has their own ID, and this information can be used to define dependency between two different solutions. So this is our primary solution, and we want to ensure that that one will be deployed first before our child solution will be deployed. We can do that by defining a solution dependency. And we can see the solution dependency from here. So if we go to the manifest tab of the package view, we can see the actual XML which is generated by the package designer. From here we can see that there's activation dependencies element and activation dependency, and to which we have defined the solution ID. And this will ensure that this particular solution cannot be deployed unless the other solution with this particular solution ID has been deployed to this environment. How did we actually get the activation dependency into the manifest XML file? There's no designers available to define activation dependencies, so we are unable to do that from the package designer. But since the Visual Studio is capable of this XML merge functionality, it means that we are able to define any additional XML elements directly to package template XML. And within here we do have, for example, the IntelliSense, so we can see which kind of elements are available and what kind of types and attributes are available. So we can define any additional elements using this package template XML for which we don't have designers. Since we have defined the activation dependency here, and there's additional information defined as using the solution designer, we will get an output of the actual package structure as defined in here. The other thing which the demo X app global resources is responsible of doing is deploying app global resource files. App global resource files are used for runtime translation of, for example, labels within the web part and so on. Back in the 2007, if you wanted to deploy app global resources, it was relatively tricky. Now in 2010, we can, as long as we can get the translation files to Visual Studio structure, and for the particular translation file, we can define which kind of deployment type we want to use. In this case, we have set the deployment type to be app global resource. It will mean that to whichever web applications this particular solution will be deployed, the resource files will be deployed to app global resources folder underneath particular IIS application. We can define the deployment type to any item within our Visual Studio structure depending on our target location of particular item. In this case, it's app global resource, so it will be deployed underneath the IIS app global resources folder. So now that we have went through the basic structure which we have in a Visual Studio, we can actually show how this works in practice. Let's move to solution management side of the central administration, and we can see that I've already uploaded these two solution packages. There's the demo X app global resources and primary solution, and the status of this both is not deployed. Now if I try to deploy the child solution package without deploying the dependent package, we will get an error. So if I want to try to deploy this one to whatever, let's say all web content applications, we will get an error since the dependent solution doesn't exist. If we move back the solution structure or the solution management and first deploy our primary solution as a globally deployed solution, and then we move back to the child solution, we are able to deploy our solution package properly. Let's deploy it to all web applications which are available. Since we have defined the translation or resource file location to be app global resource, we can go and see that it was actually properly deployed. The regex file name is mytranslations.regex. So now if we actually go to the app global resource folder underneath the IIS application, we should be able to see our translation file which exists in here. So what it actually did, it deployed a subfolder based on our settings within the Visual Studio, and if we open up that folder, there's additional subfolder, and from there we can actually see the mytranslation.regex file. If we don't want to use or deploy these subfolders, we can actually modify the settings from the Visual Studio as well. This is the default behavior of the Visual Studio. But we can also define the deployment location structure to be something else. So we can say for the following properties that we don't want our subfolder structure to be created underneath the UpGlobal Resources folder. And that would basically mean that the particular regex files would be uploaded directly to UpGlobal Resources folder. So that would mean the following. Here, and then we are deploying the deployment location is web application root and UpGlobal Resources. One thing concerning still the solution dependencies is the fact that what we also mentioned during the presentation. If we now retract the primary solution, this will be successful due to the fact that the solution dependencies are only checked during deployment time. And if we now take a primary solution away, that would probably mean that our child solution won't work properly. This is something which you should be aware when you are designing the ways you are retracting your solutions within the farm.
Solution upgrade was already supported in 2007 version, but full application lifecycle process was difficult to establish. In 2010 we have more extensive support to handle these updates between different versions of our customizations. One of the nice improvements is the fact that the solution manifest supports now adding a binding redirect to the web configuration file. This way the assembly version numbers can actually be used for assembly versioning. In the example we are deploying a new version of the existing assembly, and we have updated the assembly version from version 1.0 to 2.0. Since we have included also the binding redirection element under the assembly element, SharePoint will automatically update the web application's configuration file to do the proper redirections for this assembly, to do the proper redirections of the assembly references to a newer version. Binding redirection is also the way how to custom code is by default automatically working in 2010. So if it was implemented using 2007 object model code or reference the SharePoint 2007 object model code, all of that code will be automatically available and work properly in SharePoint 2010. There's actually by default when we install the SharePoint, there's machine configuration redirections done, which will ensure that the proper assembly versions will be executed. Package Explorer is a nice alternative view of your project where you view the project from a package perspective. Rather than seeing just a relative flat list of the customized artifacts in a Packaging Explorer, the Packaging Explorer provides the tree view which denotes the solution manifest at the root level, with direct children being mapped to the folders and features. Each feature then has customization artifacts as the direct children. From this view you can see the packaging errors, such as adding the same customization artifact to two different features. This situation is made known during the packaging of the solution as a warning. In the picture we have on the slide, we are showing one of these things, quite common, not common, but one of the mistakes you might end up doing by having the same SharePoint project item in multiple features. So in this module we covered the key changes and enhancements in feature framework and in solution deployment. We went through a lot of individual details to introduce these new capabilities one by one. Thanks for your time, and hopefully the presentation was useful.